Oliver was a machinist down there, and so you go over here and you take one of the cylinder heads that he was through with and carry it out here and put it in the truck. And then when you turn around, he's standing here with the other cylinder head in one hand saying, here it is. I think he was an arm wrestling champion of the Air Force or something, big old red-headed guy, big old arm and everything. We're going to talk about some misfires today. And
that was Robbie last night.
Now, we want everybody to be working together. You want to be a mechanic or an automotive technician, and what's the difference? What do you think? What's the difference between a mechanic and an automotive technician?
One's certified,
Well, not necessarily. A lot of times, you know, whenever we used to pump gas at the gas station, the guy that came and pumped your gas and checked the oil and aired up your tires at the gas station back when they used to be full service gas stations, they called him a mechanic, even if that's all he did. Anybody that puts their hand on your car to do anything was known as a mechanic. All right, so what we got here, a mechanic might spend 10% of the repair time diagnosing the problem and 90% of the time repairing the issue. An automotive technician might spend 90% of the repair time diagnosing and 10% of the time actually repairing something. Now that's Eric Ziegler's definition. I kind of like that. All right, so the things you got to consider when you're looking at misfires. Customer description. How does the customer describe it? When it was written up, what did the customer say? Now you're going to have to depend on your service advisor, if you're not the one talking to the customer, to find out the skinny on what he's talking about. And sometimes when the service advisors are real busy, they might not get enough information. You might have to go have them call the customer and get more information. Vehicle history. Where has it been? Who else has worked on it? If you're at a dealership, you'll have a file with that thing, or you can pull up the service history out of in your manufacturer service information history based on a serial number. But whenever at the dealership I used to work at, we kept all of there was a bank of file cabinets. There must have been 30 or 40 file cabinets there, and they actually had a whole bunch of folders, and each car that was worked on there had its own folder. So vehicle history, you look back at the vehicle history and tell. One example of that was the general manager called me out there to talk to an old man that said he had to have his ignition module replaced at one of these great TFI modules. He said it was broke. The shop that replaced it said whoever worked on it last broke it. And he said the last place that had it worked on was here. And so he says, do you think we broke this? And I looked at it and I went and pulled the service history on the vehicle, and I saw that the guy that had done the intake manifold gasket, and whenever you do that you got to pull the distributor out. And a lot of people will pry on that module when they're setting the time in, and when they do, they break it. And I knew what kind of work that guy did. I mean, he was fairly competent, but he was prone to make mistakes like that because he liked to do things with a hammer and all this kind of stuff. And so I said, yeah. I said, we broke it. And so they gave the guy the money back from the module. You got TSB. Anybody that does not use TSBs or is not willing to use Identifix to look is going to cost themselves a heck of a lot of work. Because you can get a heck of a lot of really, really good information from TSBs, Identifix, special service messages, all that kind of thing. And pattern failures. Pattern failure is like this particular car usually fries the ignition module. One of the weirdest pattern failures I ever seen was on some of these Ford Explorers, like a single overhead cam. You're doing the timing chain thing on that right now. When they came in there, they would come in skipping with a misfire under load. And these were when they were nearly brand new. This was like in '97 when they first came out. And just about every one of those I saw misfiring under load was cylinder number 4. And it needed a spark plug. Just about every single time. And Donnie got in an argument with me about it. He says, I don't believe it's always going to be cylinder number 4. He said, I hadn't seen any of those anyway. I said, I bet I've seen 20 of them. Yeah, that's weird because we're in the same shop working side by side. And so he pulls one in there. Well, while we were talking, Mickey over the transmission area, he goes, hey, I got one over here that's, they say is a transmission problem, but it's skipping. And I looked and it was the '97 Explorer. I said, see about throwing a number 4 plug in it, see what that does. And he did that, and he goes, yeah, that fixed it. Without even looking at it, I told him, that's a pattern failure. You're not going to see that on a lot of vehicles. That was an oddity on that particular one. But pattern failures mean this usually fails on this. That's the weak links in the chain, right? Condition, engine temperature, was it hot or cold when it did it? Ambient temperature, like some of them will run rough and trashy when they're cold because the intake manifold gaskets, those silicone rubber ones, will leak air whenever they're cold. and then they swell up and they seal after they warm up. The fuel trims will be screwed up and everything. Ambient temperature, how cold is it? It only does it in cold weather, only like you were talking about something about one that wouldn't start when it was, no. You said that red truck of yours wouldn't start if the weather was real cold. Remember that kind of thing, that's the ambient temperature thing. Load, humidity. Secondly, single cylinder. Is it a single cylinder misfire or is it multiple cylinders? Is it firing on different ones of them? On the same bank, adjacent cylinders, companion cylinders, all of this. You gotta take all that. If this one's firing and that one's firing and they're both sisters, could have an issue with that particular coil because it's gonna fire the companion cylinders. All right? Now, good combustion requires 4 basic elements. Sufficient compression, that's your mechanical integrity of your engine you're talking about there. Good fuel, which would be quality, purity, and volatility. I have seen them where they absolutely would not start until you drain the tank and put good fuel in it. You can, that Escort sat out there until the gas started to get a little rotten, and with the gas that was a little rotten, it absolutely would not start. Well, they can run bad and ping and all, and skip and cut up and misfire and all because of bad fuel too. Now, whenever fuel starts to go rotten, what is it that changes about it? Which way does the octane go?
Well, it would go down, it wouldn't
It goes down, but what does that mean? It means it's more explosive.
Really?
Yeah.
I figured
Higher octane is less explosive. Higher octane burns slower. Believe it or not. Okay, correct air fuel mixture, ratio mixture, strong and consistent ignition spark. The light, you gotta light it off at the right time and with good strong lightning.
So why would you want a higher octane in your vehicle then?
Well, whenever it burns slower, they act like, see, it's burning farther, pushing the piston for a longer amount of time. The problem with that is if your vehicle not set up to run on higher octane fuel, what's going to happen is that some of it's not going to burn, and it's going to leave crud in the cylinder. It's going to turn into carbon, and you make a mess. So you're really better off, if it calls for 87 octane, run 87 octane. If it calls for 93, run 93. Whatever it calls for, that's what you're supposed to run. There's TSBs on that. On Chrysler and Ford, don't run high octane fuel and one that's set up to run on 87 octane. Because this stuff happens in nanoseconds, okay?
The higher the octane fuel is, the more time you can put to them too.
Now it's burning slower. Anyway, our green GMC Sierra, and everybody's seen this truck around here, was dead in the water. We're gonna see where we went on this thing. And so you guys, some of you guys are gonna be really have carnal knowledge of this. It's a trainer, nobody drives it, no start, it had spark but no fuel pressure. Been like that for a little while. Then we hadn't long put a fuel pump in it. All right, so we knew it had gas in it, but we didn't hear the fuel pump. So in the underhood PDC, we found the fuel pump prime terminal. You guys remember this? Connected to test lap between B plus and the prime terminal, we should see the bulb light. You can see what we did here. Going from battery to the prime terminal, that light bulb should light because this ground should come through there and light that bulb. We didn't see one. So that means we got a problem either here, here, or somewhere in between here. Or maybe even in the underhood bus electrical center, right? All right. So this takes the relay completely out of the loop. But we didn't see anything. Saw nothing there. We went to the prime terminal, didn't see anything, and we wound up going here. We found, well, let me back up. What we wound up finding here, on that thing right there, when we went to the prime terminal, we actually found the fuel pump itself was an open circuit. We put it on the bench. We pull the pump, pull the tank, pull the pump, put it on the bench, and we didn't find, we put power right to the pump and it wouldn't run, so we got another pump, put it in there, and we had main engine burn. That's what we did on that. All right. The exhaust was doing this puff, puff, puff of the missile, you know, whatever, at the exhaust. We had multiple misfires. Scan tool showed 25 plus fuel trim on bank one, and it was skipping, what was it, 3 and 5? Is that what you told me? So 3 and 5 was skipping. We pull the plugs. They look all greasy and wet like this. That's what a plug looks like when it hadn't been firing. Doesn't mean the plug's bad, or it could. But if you see one that looks like that when it hadn't been firing, like if there wasn't no spark or whatever. All right, so we pull the plugs on 3 and 5. We run these greasy ones. Neither one of them had fired for quite a while, even when the engine was running. All right, so we fixed one and misfired on the other one. We misfired on checking this misfire. And it was counting up misfires on the scan tool screen. The injector was clicking, but we found this when we were about to swap positions with the number 5 coil. That pin was bent right there. That's an actual picture of it. And so he had the coil in his hand. I picked it up and I said, here's the problem right here. So we bent that down. Do you think we fixed it? Did that fix it?
Possible.
Possibly. All right. The spark was good and hot now on the 5 coil, but the cylinder had yet to hit a lick of the snake. And the scan tool misfire screen was still showing number 5 counting up like a stock trader's dream screen. It's going up. There we go. We kept getting them. It kept counting up. It'll count up to a certain, and then it'll go back to 0 and count up again. 5 was the only one doing that, so we still had a misfire on cylinder number 5. And if we looked at our fuel trim, we'd have still seen positive fuel trim numbers. Now this was same song second verse that you had with the 4.8. Same kind of deal. All right. Except every piece of data, we busted out this tool. I actually went and found this whenever RAD there, you know your initials are RAD, right? Okay, that's pretty good. That tester connects the battery in one injector, got a harness plug from a jump in to adapt it to the GMC's injector. This is an OG, this is a cool tool right here. It's really good. Everybody needs one of these. It cost about $100 when I bought this one. We got to know which tools to reach for. They'll get us the most accurate data with the fewest steps. What I want to know, so whenever you're thinking about this, we were talking about the radio earlier, I'm going to do what's the quickest thing I can do to find this problem, because that's where you're going to wind up doing your most efficient work. If you can find out quickly what's wrong, you know, some people will say, well, I swapped the relays around, that's all it was. You know, well, yeah, you get lucky sometimes, but what if it's not a relay? What if it's wiring down there? You got to be able to find it quick. And we wanted to find it quick, and if this is a good test. This is really a good test. Now, I used to use this machine right here. This is the actual machine. This was my service bay. You know, I had some other computers over there at the time. There's a parts room back there. There's the fan I mounted on the wall, so it could blow on me and keep me cool. This service bay diagnostic system was $50,000 machine when I took delivery of it as the Ford dealer in '91. Okay, and for the next 8 years, it was my best buddy. That machine right there and me went everywhere together. By this, it did injector flow testing. It would pressure up the fuel system automatically when you told it to do the test, and energize each injector long enough to drop the pressure 10 psi while measuring how long it took to make that pressure drop, and it would display the results on a graph like this. And it was really cool when it did it. It was very accurate too. Now this is a different way than the way we do it. It was looking at a fixed amount of pressure drop, and our little tool looks at a fixed amount of time. See, the variable on this one's the drop in pressure, and the variable on that one was the, you know, in other words, their variable is how much time it took to drop the pressure. So basically that's what we're doing there. All right, so what we did here was, that little injector testing machine, 1 pulse is 500 milliseconds. That's a half a second, isn't it? 50 pulses, 10 milliseconds apiece. It's all 500 milliseconds, it's just breaking it up a different way. 100 pulses, 5 milliseconds. Be cool to look at that on the scope. So it basically, you can actually do it any way you want to and recheck your, you know, because fuel injectors have different spray patterns and all that, and sometimes it'll be spraying fuel, but it won't be spraying it like you want it to. But on the GMC, the number 5 wasn't delivering any fuel, even though it was clicking. Now, it's kind of like what we had on that one. Was that number 5 or 6? Or what was it? It was 6 on yours, wasn't it? 246. So it was clicking when you listened to it, but it wouldn't put any fuel out at all. Now, I would say that what caused that on both vehicles was rotten gas. Because rotten gas gets varnished in there and it clogs it up. It doesn't take much clogging to clog up an injector, right? But that particular one was the first one that got it. All right, so where there's no fuel, there's no fire. Well, what else can cause a misfire? Mechanical issues are one factor to be sure. All right. So, which of these would most likely indicate a mechanical problem? A, B, C, D, E, F, or G?
F.
Yeah.
G.
Okay, you're saying that F would cause a mechanical problem? Well, what is wrong with the engine that has produced the plugs in illustration F?
Too much carbon on the plugs.
It's burning oil.
Yeah.
Burning oil? Well, what happened to my little electrodes? Why would burning oil do that? Why would burning oil get rid of my electrodes and melt these like you hit them with a torch?
That's what I'm saying. It's burning oil, running probably lean.
So it's running lean and burning oil.
Yeah, and it's
You're short of stacking some tolerances here, aren't you?
well, running lean to melt those plugs like that.
I happen to know what did that because I took that picture with it laying on my desk.
Did it run hot?
That particular cylinder was the only one that was running hot.
Because it was running lean.
Nope. Well, yes and no. Whenever it runs lean, why is it running lean? If one's running lean, why is it, what typically causes one to run lean?
Bad injector.
Well, that didn't have a bad injector. Although after this garbage has happened, you may want to have to put an injector in it, but the injector wasn't what caused it. That is sort of not such a bad prognosis. It'll make it run a little warmer, but it won't melt them down like this.
Be a bad intake gas.
It would be something holding the valve open. Something holding the intake valve open. Because every time it lit off, it had too much air in there because it was pulling it through there. And it's typically a valve problem whenever you see it like that. Every time I've ever seen one like that, this one guy put one in a F-150 one time, had a 302 in it, or 5 liter, and it looked like it's just one of them. Now, both of these came out of the same cylinder. So which engines have 2 plugs in one cylinder?
4-cylinder.
4-cylinder Fords have got 2 plugs in one cylinder. Both these came out of the front cylinder on that one.
That come out of Amber Sawyer.
Sure
Really
did.
cool.
And she brought them in there and said, what caused this? And I said, you got an intake valve that stuck open a little bit, typically. And so that's what she found. There was enough carbon on it where it was holding that valve
Did she
open.
show you the valve?
Huh?
Did she show you the valve?
No, she didn't show me the
The
valve.
valve looked like he tried to pull it through the head. It got so hot.
Yep, it umbrellaed, yeah,
Yeah.
like an upside down umbrella. Yeah, I've seen that before. All right, so basically what you got here, what's this right here? What causes that?
Running octane.
That ice cream, no, that ice cream I'm talking about. I ain't talking about the red stain from the octane booster. I'm talking about that ice cream looking junk. What causes that?
I don't know.
Valve stem seals. Whenever you see valve stem seal, I mean, when you see that, your valve stem seals are leaking on that cylinder. And it begins to get, and this old puffy hard stuff, it ain't easy to get off of there. Of course, not that you want to, you put a plug in it anyway. And it depends on how quick it comes back, whether you do anything about it. This right here is a wore out plug. This right here is a plug that's running really lean. See how white it is? That plug right there is about like you'd expect it to be. That one's okay. This one here is running just a little bit rich and then maybe burning some more. That is super rich. See the puffy sooty deposits on it? All right, let's keep going. So we're running out of time here. All right, ignition misfire will bite while driving. One of you guys saw this plug the other day, brought it to me. That's you, Jonathan, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, and these right here, see how that carbon tracks on the side of that plug? These are the ones out of that red Expedition that he pulled the plugs out of the other day. And when they wear enough on the inside, or when they get rounded off enough down here that the voltage is required to fire them is too great, the spark looks for somewhere else to go and makes a carbon track on the boot and the plug. You replace the plug and the boot or the wire in occasions like that, or it will come back on you. On vehicles with spark plug wires, a little bit of soapy water sprayed on the wires can reveal a spark jump like this one that will cause a misfire bite, but will otherwise be hard to spot. If you feel a cylinder going boop, 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 that's an ignition misfire, right? An injector won't typically go doop, 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 like that, like a sharp misfire bite, because it's firing some of the time. Then there's the cracked spark plug. This one here has actually been busted. That one's cracked down in there. A little temperature stress got to it or whatever. All right, keep on going. Now this kind of misfire right here that goes boom, 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 you know, misfiring now and again at your exhaust. I hold a rag down there. That's from a video I got on YouTube. It's usually because of a plug that's gapped too close, but other things can cause it, like a partially fouled plug or cracked ceramic insulator. The one that was doing this was in that Crown Victoria out there. You hold a plug like that, it looks just fine. You turn it over, this ceramic was broke loose down here, falls down there. When it's in the cylinder, it was down there like that, and it would hit, but only some of the time. Yeah.
Why is a plug that's gapped too close to do that? Because on like those hot rods,
Yeah.
it's got superchargers or something.
Yeah.
Say like if you put one on it and it said the spark plug gap was supposed to be 45,000, we usually close them up to like 20.
The reason you're doing that is because you want, well, the reason you're doing that is because you want it to burn a long time. You don't want your spark to have to use up a lot of spark jumping the gap. You want it to burn, you want a long burn time. And that's the reason you do that on a hot rod supercharged car, because of the time involved. And you basically, if you've got it closer, you're not going to misfire when you're going into it heavy and hard. This is only at idle. I will tell you this though, sometimes there's a fine line on that. If you gap them too close, if you gap it too close, it may not start. See what I mean? I mean, I've actually seen people say they're gapping them too close and to try to get all of that extra burn time, but then they couldn't get it to start. You know, so they had to stretch them out a little bit and find that sweet spot where it'll start and where you'll have your good long spark. All right. Now then, vacuum leaks on one runner. We call it a single cylinder misfire. That's an intake gasket that's blown. If you don't hear a vacuum leak, the best way to find a leak like this is you got a torn injector O-ring with smoke, propane, or a shot of carburetor cleaner while watching a short fuel trim. If you're watching a short fuel trim, shoot a little carburetor spray, and you see the fuel trim suddenly change and the engine changes the way it runs, you pretty well found it. All right. Then, now I got this right here from Eric's article. Thought it was really good. Creative use of a scope goes beyond ignition waveforms. Amps while cranking and starter occur under the same thing. See, this blue line is the same on both of these. It's just a little higher. You have a little filtering going on here. All right, so basically, you're putting this on there and you go whoa, 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 like that, and you got you're putting an ignition trigger on cylinder number 4 so you can identify cylinder number 4. It's the 4-cylinder, right? Okay, so you might notice these it's taking more to squeeze the air on some than it is others, right? 3 of them aren't squeezing that much. This one here is squeezing more. And this is the same one. It is basically, notice it's got 4 is doing that, and you're basically looking at your intake vacuum. It's a shade higher on 4 sometimes, you know. But the intake vacuum, I like this a lot better than that because, you know, this will tell you which one's on. So basically what you wound up with here, a Honda needed a valve adjustment, which is still something Hondas need. You know, when you pull the codes out of Kelly's Honda Pilot the other day, we got multiple misfire codes, and our identifix says you needed to do a valve adjustment on it. Well, this is a valve adjustment here. See these adjustable valves? Use your feeler gauge, and you're going to set them up so that you got a good drag through there. But you got to have each one of them in the right place. You got to have it basically where both of the valves are closed, so that you've got a little bit of lash. They call that a valve lash adjustment, right? I did a zillion of those things on Volkswagen Bugs and other vehicles that had to have that. This used to be very common. Now Honda's about the only people I know of that's unknown to it. All right, a misfire at cruise, a random or partial misfire at cruise might happen on first one cylinder and then the other due to valve stem seal deposit. There's another valve stem seal deposit plug. You see how that one almost has closed up the gap. This one right here is the one I showed you earlier. Random multiple cylinder misfires can also be caused by a combination of this and EGR fluid. You see these little ports right here? That's where the EGR goes in there, so every cylinder will get an equal amount. The only problem with that, these things tend to stop up with carbon, and you'll have all of them but 1 or 2 stopped up with carbon, and those 2 will be misfiring when EGR starts to flow, because EGR is going to be flowing too much into those cylinders and not enough into the other one. I've seen this before. The way I found it, I was cracking the throttle. When you crack the throttle, it'd start misfiring. And then I found out it was shutting the injector down on that cylinder, and at the time, this was a brand new strategy that I hadn't seen before, and I says, there must be something wrong with the PCM. But it turned out the PCM was picking up a misfire on that particular cylinder, and it was cylinder number 4, I think, and it would shut down the injector on that cylinder so it wouldn't put gas in there and mess up the converter. So if you see one shutting down an injector, look for another reason to skip it. When I pulled the upper intake off, every one of these was clogged up except the number 4 one. Multiple cylinder misfire may show up as a PO300 code or several different cylinder codes. Can be EGR related or fuel related. Fuel quality for water, alcohol, because some folks may gas up non-flex fuel vehicles at the E85 pump and make themselves a big problem. All right, so I worked on a 95 Continental one time that had an intermittent rough idle, and when I connected the WDS, which is now the IGS, to do a power balance test, I found that it had a misfire that was walking through the firing order. 1, 3, 7, 2, 6, 5, 4, 8, and then it would start over. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. 1, 3, 7, 2, 6, 5, 4, 8. You think about that. And again it would do this. This was nuts. Now I didn't do it all the time, but when it did do it, this is what the skip. Imagine trying to pick up if you don't have power balance. All you're feeling is a rough idle. Customer doesn't like it. So after my initial diagnosis, I called the hotline, the Ford hotline, and they were just as puzzled as I was. What the heck could cause that? They didn't have a clue. Okay, this is a returnless fuel system with a fuel pump module that controls fuel speed to regulate fuel pressure, right? See, there's that sensor up there. The tools available were the scan tools, pin representing fuel rail pressure. This right here tells you what fuel rail pressure is. And there's a transducer that gives you live fuel pressure when you put it on the test port. So I could put both of those on the same screen on the WDS. When I connected the transducer and compared the two readings, I saw this bouncing business going on. All right, the end of that story was they had a bad fuel pump that was cavitating, pushing air into the fuel rail. There was no return, so the only way it could get the air out of the fuel rail was pushing it through the injectors. And because of the dynamics of the way all that was working, it was walking it through the firing order. Real weird. And I found another one, previous experience. I worked on a Dodge van with a returnless fuel system and an unusual skip. And its problem was similar, but the skip stayed with cylinder number 1 because this engine's mounted at a sort of a angle in the van, and all of those air bubbles were gathering right here around that injector. If I'd have had a glass fuel rail where I could see in it, I'd have picked that up right away. But boy, it took me a while to figure that one out. But I had air coming up in there, and all the rest of the injectors had good fuel, but it was a steady misfire on cylinder 1. I think it was a 95 or 96.
How was you getting air?
Yeah, the pump was bad. The pump starts to wear out a little bit, it just whips up foam and it goes up there. All right. The Continental's fuel rail, though, was mounted perfectly level because it was a sideways 4.6. And that was the deal on that. The air bubbles were able to move around on the Continental, but here they all gathered right there because air bubbles go up. All right, tell me something you know now that you didn't know when you came in here.
97 octane burns slower, or 93 octane?
93
burns slower?
octane burns slower, yeah, it does.
Air bubbles can happen because of a bad fuel pump.
And if you got a returnless fuel system, they don't got anywhere to go except through the injectors. When I was teaching at Power Stroke Diesel class out there in Fort Worth, I was walking around with this 8-hour PowerPoint presentation, and they said, how does the returnless fuel system on the Power Stroke engines with returnless fuel system get rid of the air? Because they got little orifices on the other ones, you know. And I had never thought about that. I mean, it's got to be going through the injector. You know, I mean, I've thought about it since then, but at the time he's...
On a 6.0?
No, on a 7.3. But I says, whenever he asked me that, I said, I don't know. Oh, you know, what you gonna say? If you don't know, you're just supposed to say you don't know. You know, you don't say something just so that you can be the big boss man. Anytime if you're ever teaching somebody something, don't try to act like you know stuff you don't know. You know, so they ask you, say, I told the guy, I don't have a clue. I figure it out. But anyway, it's got to be pushing it through the injectors because there's nowhere else we can go, just like we're talking about here. Anyway, but